Hi everyone, today we're going to do a trip up to Carlisle. We are going to do it in two parts. So part one will be from Settle up to Appleby in Westmoreland, and then part two will be from Appleby up to Carlisle. So we're setting off from Settle, Settle being the southernmost point of the Settle to Carlisle railway, and we're in a class 40, so we're in D345, which had its tops number of 4145. Now, even though the locomotive has a maximum speed of 90 miles per hour, we will only really get to about 60 miles per hour on this leg. There will also be a few speed restrictions, especially going over places like Ribblehead Viaduct. So without much ado, we'll set off. So traditionally the locomotives would stop just as where we are now, where the locomotive stop sign is, and that's due to Settle having a relatively short platform. So not too bad if you've got like 4 or 5 coaches, but anything longer than that, then your rear coaches are going to be hanging off the back of a platform. So the line itself was, I guess, built in the late 1870s, mid to late 1870s, and it was the last railway line which was built with construction mainly of manual labour. So they used about 6,000 navvies to actually help build this railway line, and it does go through some of the most beautiful scenery in England. So Settle being in North Yorkshire, and it goes up through the Yorkshire Dales and the North Pennines up into Cumbria, which is the home county of Carlisle. So over the journey, there's 14 tunnels, 25 viaducts, and most notably Ribblehead Viaduct, which has 24 arches and stands an impressive 104 feet above the ground. Back in the 80s, or up until the 80s, Ribblehead Viaduct was, it had 2 lines going across it, but due to work and weight restrictions, it now only has 1 line going across. So on the odd occasion, you may have 1 train going over the viaduct and another train just held at either Bleemore or at Ribblehead Station, waiting for the train on the viaduct to clear. So once again, I do apologise about the quality of the graphics and the sound. The PC which I'm using is a relatively old PC. All the graphics are dumbed down as much as what it can be, so the video can actually appear to be quite slow and quite jerky. But you know, in due course, we'll replace this computer, and we can up the graphics quality a little bit, and hopefully things will be a bit more smoother. So the fact that the line is open today is really down to a group of individuals in the 80s because British Rail had planned to actually close this railway down, this line down. They said it just wasn't cost effective and it was costing a lot of money to actually maintain. And I think back in the early 80s, their annual passenger numbers for this line was around 93,000. So in the grand scheme of things, there really wasn't a lot of people using the line. But then it really didn't help with the trains that British Rail were actually running on the Settle Carlisle line. It really didn't make it easy for people to actually come and explore the railway. Freight services were also diverted and went up and down the West Coast Main Line, whereas today they've now been, or a lot of them have now been rerouted to come over the Settle to Carlisle line, and that has meant that the West Coast Main Line has been freed up of freight traffic. So just south of Settle, a few miles south, is a little junction called Hellifield. So Hellifield is a junction where you can go on to Skipton, Keighley and Leeds. You can head to Carnforth or head down to Blackburn. So just going back to the railway back in the 70s, so due to the lack of investment, it really was quite a poor railway to travel on, and fortunately a number of people and a number of groups really fought British Rail and went to the government to actually keep the line open, and certainly those people back in the 80s, they could see the potential of this line. And I think nowadays it's I think an annual passenger numbers around about 1.2 million. So definitely worthwhile keeping up. You know, you have a lot of people coming to walk the Three Peaks. So the Three Peaks are the Three Peaks of Pennygent, Ingleborough and Whernside. And people try and do those Three Peaks, I believe, in 24 hours. I've never done it myself, but I believe that's the target that people try and achieve. So I'm more or less in Ribblesdale now. And first station that we'll see is Horton and Ribblesdale. So we're in a 1 in 100 gradient. So it struggles a little bit, does this class 40. We're at maximum power and we're doing 44 miles an hour. So off to our right is the first of the three peaks, which is Pennygant. Just going through Horton and Ribblesdale. So we've more or less got an incline all the way up to Aysgill summit, which is where are we? It's just the other side of well, it's in between Garsdale and Kirby Stephen. So the next station that we'll be going through will be Ribblehead Station, and then on to Ribblehead Viaduct. I do like the sound of this Class 40, having the English electric engine whistling away. For those of you who remember, the Class 40s were actually quite a common locomotive, especially on the Settle to Carlisle, on the Leeds to Carlisle services. Back in the early 80s, D200 was often on this service from Leeds to Carlisle and then back to Leeds again, and that really did attract quite a lot of passengers onto the line. And when D200 was doing this service, it was in the old green livery, the green livery with a full yellow end. So really struggling at this point with the 1 in 100 gradient, and I think we've got round about maybe 600 tons just behind us that we're pulling. So we start to approach our first speed restriction, which is 30 miles an hour, and then a little bit after that we'll probably head down again on the other side of Ribblehead Station to go over the viaduct. For those of you who got the 1975 version of this pack, you'll notice that we will remain at 2 tracks going through Ribblehead Station and then into and over the viaduct. So I've been caught out a couple of times when I've been on this one, and I've had to slam the anchors on to try and stop the train by the signal after Ribblehead Station, because there's been a train coming over the viaduct. So straight ahead of us we have Ingleborough, and then we'll have Whernside a little bit further around to the right. Okay, so just come to Ribblehead Station now. Just heading over Ribblehead Viaduct. I believe the place below is called Batty Moss or something like that. It certainly wouldn't have been a nice place to be, you know, when they were constructing the viaduct back in the day. The other side of the viaduct will go past the sidings at Bleemore, and then we'll head into Bleemore Tunnel, which is the longest tunnel on the line, and reputably said to be haunted. Bleemore box. Here we are, speed limit back up to 60, so now we can start to get some speed. So once we come out of Bleemore Tunnel, the next station that we'll pass will be Dent, and I believe that the village of Dent is it's about 4 miles away. So yeah, 4 miles from the actual station. So pretty tough gradient at the moment, back to the 1 in 100 as we enter Bleemore Tunnel. And this is roughly, I think it's about 3 miles long. It'd have been horrendous having to dig this tunnel out by pickaxe and shovel. I'm sure quite a few workers died, you know, whilst they constructed this tunnel. So the 40s themselves, the class 40s, they were quite popular, especially with train spotters, and didn't see a great deal of them in my hometown of Leeds. The odd occasion they came through, and really, if we wanted to go and watch I guess have a look at a 40, the easiest place for us to go would have probably caught the train down to Wakefield Westgate, and then the Horbury bus, which would take us to the top of the hill, and we'd walk down the hill to Healy Mills. And especially on the weekend, we'd see some 40s on shed there, some 47s, 56s, 31s, 37s, 08s. So there was quite a lot of motive power when, or quite a lot of different, you know, motive power back in the 80s. But again, the Healy Mills has gone as well. There's another marshalling yard, just like Tinsley, you know, 2 huge marshalling yards, just now gone. So the 40s really met their demise around 1984. There was still a few knocking around, and I think they've been renumbered into the class 97s. I think they've been in use at the Railway Technical Centre at Derby, and, you know, used in engineering works. Got some good speed up now, just around to hit the maximum for this part before we hit the speed limit of 30, just before Dent Station. These 40s were used more or less on any type of train. We used on expresses, we used on freight work. They really did suffer from bogie fractures, you know, or frame fractures. Yeah, and a lot of this was caused, I guess, by people or by controllers, whatever title they have, routing these large locomotives around real tight curves, which over a period of time really caused issues, with cracks in the frames. But once you've heard a 40, go by or in full song, you'll never forget them. My favourite engine when I was young was a Deltic. I enjoyed listening to the drone of the Deltic, and I could understand why people really liked the whistlers. These were big Leviathans, and oops, that'd be a bit too quick here. Yeah, so they really were Leviathans, but yeah, pretty cool. People would come from afar to watch these locos. Speeding a little bit there, too busy talking away. So Dent Station. So on the left were the old sidings. Back in the day, and obviously well lifted now. So we've now got around about a 4-mile journey up to Garsdale. So back in the day from Garsdale, you'd have been able to get the train across into Wensleydale. Obviously, a lot of these, nearly all these old branch lines have all been closed. And what they didn't realise was back in the day, it was the small towns which were the feeders for the railways. So as soon as you started cutting off these remote towns and villages, you also cut a lot of your passenger numbers on the main lines, because people couldn't get to the main stations because they'd closed the local lines. Prime example is my local line from Crossgates, Scholes, Fauna, and into Everby. So not too far now from Garsdale. So we'll go through Garsdale, and then on the right hand side will be the old sidings and the branch line up to Wensleydale. Beautiful part of the country. It doesn't matter what season you come in. It's absolutely amazing. Heading up here in winter when it's full of snow is out of this world. You really realise how isolated and how high this railway actually is. It's interesting the change between types of signals, how we go from semaphore signals to the aspect signals that are used today. So we've now got around about 2-3 miles till we get to Aysgill old sidings, and also the summit, which is the highest point on the railway. So from that point onwards, it's more or less downhill all the way for us to Appleby. Not too bad nowadays, where you can just pull a lever and you can just set the power setting. But back in the old days, when the steam locomotives were up and down here, it'd have been hard work, you know, all the way from Settle up to Aysgill Summit, you know, constantly just chucking coal in to try and keep the boiler hot and having the steam come through. I missed the steam days by probably about 10 years, and but I did take this journey behind Leander. Not too sure what class of steam locomotive it is, but yeah, it took I think Leander up here, and I think maybe Evening Star back to Leeds. Obviously, back in those days, it was also it was on a steam excursion as well, with me missing the steam era by about 10 years. So on the left-hand side, we'll approach the old Aysgill sidings, and then just past the old sidings is the summit, and then we're more or less rolling down the hill all the way to Kirby Stephen. So the old sidings would have been just up here on the left. And now we start heading down. So now we've got the reverse gradient, so we're now going down 1 in 100. So the challenge here is just to obviously keep an eye on your speed. But these old locomotives were actually quite noisy and drafty back in the day, not like I guess what the trains that they use today. But I'm sure that, you know, most drivers who have experienced first generation diesel locomotives versus the ones now. I'm sure they really enjoyed driving these locos. There's quite a number of Type 4s which would have travelled up and down on this route. So certainly the Class 40s, but also 47s would have been quite prevalent on here as well. Don't recall any Deltics, but obviously you know, the Deltics were a Type 5 anyway, with producing 3,300 brake horsepower. 37s are still seen on here, although I believe they're a Type 3. So around 14 and a half miles now to Appleby, so not too far away. And Appleby is the branch line up to, I think it's called Walker or something like that. I believe there's an army base there. I don't know if it's a training base or something, but yeah, it is. Whether that railway is still around now, I'm not too sure. Probably about three or 4 miles to Kirby Stephen. If you've not done this railway, highly recommend that you take the time out and do it. Certainly be a little bit careful of the time, you know, here. Yeah, because it does get extremely busy now, and if you can, stop off at Keighley and have a bit of a venture down the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway. Done that a couple of times. Pretty cool going on steam trains from Keighley down to Haworth, walking around the town of Haworth up to the old vicarage where the Brontes used to live, and then back to Keighley. So the line also in the 80s used to have a mixture of motive power for its regular services. So the Class 40s was certainly quite or D200 was like one service a day or something like that, you know, each way. You know, otherwise you were originally Class 47, and which was quite cool, getting 47 up to Carlisle, and then later on they changed them to a Class 31. So they didn't need as much coaching stock, so obviously they didn't need as much horsepower to actually pull the coaching stock. So not far away from Kirby Stephen. Just before we get to Kirby Stephen, we'll have sidings on the left hand side, and I believe those ones are still around today. Now unfortunately I can't get to ride on these railway lines anymore because I'm making these videos in New Zealand, so yeah, I'm quite away from home. old goods shed on the right hand side. Been very busy, probably up until the 60s. So the next point of interest before we get to Appleby will be the old Grisburn ballast sidings. So they're probably about another maybe 5 miles up the line on the left hand side. Don't know if they're still there. I guess we'll find out when we go past. Pretty easy for the locomotive on this side of the gradient. All you're really worrying about is braking and not speeding. Oh, there we go again. I think one of the lines which unfortunately did close, which I believe would have been awesome to travel on nowadays, would be the Somerset and Dorset coming out of Bath Road. And then heading to Templecombe, Evercreech, and was it Bournemouth, I believe, over the Mendips. That would have been quite cool. But the line's closed, and houses built on part of the track bed, and there's really not much that you can do. So fortunately, we've still got this awesome line which survived and very, very popular. So we're not too far away from Grisburn ballast sidings, which would have been on the left-hand side, just up here, because it's around about 3 or 4 miles from Appleby, where the sidings used to be. So the sidings would have been round about here somewhere. Not too far away from Appleby now, and there was a closed station just on the run up into Appleby on the right hand side. I believe that's probably all been demolished now. I can't remember what it was called. And then yeah, the station would have been around about here, I believe. And then on the run into Appleby station itself, the old sidings and the old dairy sidings would have been on the right hand side, maybe about half a mile or quarter of a mile before the station. And then on the left hand side would have been the sidings and the old goods shed. So getting towards the end of the journey now. I hope it's not been too painful for you. I just want to make these videos a little bit different than I guess a lot of the other videos on there. I actually want to tell you a little bit about the line and a bit of the history. I'm sure there's a million things which I've missed, and there's probably the odd thing which maybe I didn't get quite right, but hey, that's alright. So on the right hand side would have been where the old dairy sidings were, and on the left hand side here would have been the old, obviously the old goods shed and the sidings as well, which obviously the sidings have long gone. Love these old stations, a lot better than the modern stations. Really good. It really takes you back to, I guess, how things were. And it's not always about, oh, back in the old days things were better, but there's nothing wrong with how things were, you know, and having, you know, I guess the heritage still on display. So we made it. We're in Appleby. We part two. We'll do a. I'm not too sure what locomotive we'll take, but we'll do part two, and we'll do 30 miles from Carlisle to Appleby another time. Okay. Thanks, guys. See you again.